The message came on a gray November morning, blinking on my phone like it had every right to be there. Can you watch the kids on Thanksgiving? No hello, no apology, just that. I stared at it while my coffee went cold, because for the third year in a row, I hadn't been invited to the table, only to the work. I'm 67 now, old enough to know when silence is louder than words. I live alone in the small blue house on Maple Street, the one my husband Frank and I bought in 1984 with a fixed-rate mortgage and a handshake at the bank. Frank's been gone 9 years, taken by a quiet heart attack on a Tuesday afternoon. Since then, I've learned how to patch leaky faucets, argue with insurance companies, and read utility bills like they're secret messages about my future. I raised 2 children in this house, paid college tuition with overtime and thrift, and hosted more holidays than I can count. My dining table always stretched with an extra leaf. My daughter Linda used to call every day. After she married Tom, the calls became weekly, then monthly, then mostly about logistics, school pickups, emergency babysitting. Just for a few hours, Mom. Their kids, Emily and Josh, are good children, bright and loud and sticky with juice. I love them. That's what made it easier for everyone else to forget me. The first Thanksgiving, I wasn't invited. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Linda said they were keeping it small this year. I mailed a card anyway, with a $20 bill tucked inside like I always did. The second year, I watched the family photos appear on social media, tagged and smiling, the turkey golden and the table full. I clicked like and closed the app, then reheated soup and ate it standing at the counter. This year, the request came early. Linda followed up with another message before I could respond. We'll drop them off at 10 a.m., pick up around 7. There's pizza money on the counter. I noticed she didn't ask if I had plans. I noticed she didn't say thank you. I spent that afternoon folding laundry and thinking about all the small ways I'd made myself useful. The automatic payments I'd set up years ago to help with their phone bill, still quietly running. The spare key I'd given them, never returned. The way I'd learned not to mention my arthritis when they needed help moving furniture. Somewhere along the line, I'd become part of the background, like a lamp that always worked. That evening, I pulled out my old filing cabinet, the one Frank labeled with a marker decades ago. Inside were warranties, canceled checks, birth certificates, and a thin folder marked estate. I hadn't looked at it in a while. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. I was just tired of being invisible. I typed back slowly, my fingers careful on the screen. Let me think about it, I wrote. Then I turned off the phone and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the house steady and quiet around me. For the first time in years, I let myself wonder what would happen if I stopped filling the empty spaces for everyone else. That night, I took out the small spiral notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer, the one I used for grocery lists and coupon codes, and I wrote down the things I'd been pretending not to notice. Not feelings, facts. The dates I'd watched those Thanksgiving photos go up online. The times Linda's car had pulled into my driveway with the kids already buckled in, as if the decision had been made before I ever spoke. The little IOU texts that never became Venmo transfers. The receipts I'd found in my trash after they'd just used the bathroom. The way my pantry always seemed emptier after a visit. I even opened the drawer where Frank's old checkbook stubs were kept and compared them to my bank app, matching numbers like I was balancing a ledger for a business that didn't pay dividends. The hum of the refrigerator sounded louder as I realized how neatly my life had been organized around other people's convenience. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I looked at my own calendar and imagined it filled with my choices. Doctor appointments I didn't rush through, dinners I didn't eat standing up, quiet mornings where my phone wasn't a leash. I didn't cry. I just felt a steady, unfamiliar weight in my chest, like grief and dignity sharing the same space, and I whispered into the empty house, "Frank, I think they forgot I'm a person." The next morning, my phone chimed again before the sun had fully warmed the kitchen window. Linda's name lit up the screen, followed by a photo of Emily and Josh in matching pajamas, grinning like nothing in the world had ever been wrong. Under it, she wrote, "They're so excited to see you." I sat there with my cardigan still half buttoned, staring at that sentence until the toast popped and startled me. Excited to see me. Not excited to share a table with me. Not excited to squeeze in an extra chair, pass me the gravy, let me be a mother instead of a convenience. Just excited to be dropped off. I told myself not to be petty. Frank used to say gratitude doesn't always arrive on time, and some people don't notice the bridge until they're halfway across the river. But when you're 67, you start noticing who only calls when they need to cross. I went about my day the way I always did, with little routines that held me upright. I rinsed the dishes, wiped the counters, and checked the mailbox, even though I already knew what would be inside. A credit card offer, a grocery store flyer, and another medical bill from the cardiologist I started seeing after Frank died. Because grief can pull your chest tight in ways doctors don't always understand. On the envelope, my name was printed in clean black letters, as if that meant something. Back inside, I opened my bank app, with the same careful dread I used to feel opening report cards. My Social Security deposit had landed. Then I scrolled through the withdrawals, and there it was again, neat and unquestioned. A monthly auto draft for Linda's family phone plan. $49.99 every month, as dependable as sunrise. I'd set it up years ago when Tom had switched jobs and money was tight. They'd promised it was temporary. Temporary has a way of growing roots. I called the number printed on the bank statement. Through cheerful hold music, and finally reached a polite young man who sounded like he was smiling as he spoke. He asked me to verify my address, my mother's maiden name, the last 4 digits of my account. When he told me the auto payment had been running for 32 months, I felt my stomach dip like an elevator dropping 1 floor too fast. "Would you like to cancel it today?" he asked. My mouth opened, and for a second I didn't know what would come out. Cancel it. The word felt sharp, like a door slamming. "Not yet," I heard myself say, and I hated how small my voice sounded. I thanked him and ended the call, then sat with my phone in my hand as if it had suddenly become heavy. It wasn't the money alone, it was the ease of it. The way my generosity had been filed away as a permanent resource, like a line item in their budget. Around noon, I drove to the supermarket for bread and milk. The parking lot was crowded with early holiday shoppers, carts rattling, car doors thumping, the air sharp with cold. Inside, cinnamon pine cones perfumed the entrance in a way that felt almost cruel. I picked up a small turkey breast out of habit, then put it back, my fingers lingering on the plastic wrap. I didn't know what I was doing this Thanksgiving, and that uncertainty made my throat ache. At the checkout, the young cashier asked, "Big plans for the holiday?" in the same bright tone she probably used on everyone. I smiled the way older women learned to smile when the truth would make the world awkward. "Just keeping busy," I said. On the way home, my phone rang through the car speakers. Tom this time. Tom never called unless something was urgent or unpleasant. "Hey, Carol," he said, and even my name sounded like an obligation in his mouth. "So, Linda mentioned you might hesitate about Thursday. We're in a bind." "A bind," I repeated softly, my eyes on the road, the late autumn trees bare like thin fingers. "Her sister's hosting," he continued, as if that explained everything. "Linda's helping cook, and, well, kids. You know how it is. We'd really appreciate it." Her sister's hosting. That was the first time anyone had said it plainly. Not keeping it small, not just us. A hosted Thanksgiving somewhere else, with enough room for everyone but me. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles paled. "I see," I said. There was a pause, the kind where someone waits for you to do the right thing. I could hear a television in the background, some sports announcer talking loudly, life going on. "Mom?" Linda's voice slipped into the call, gentle but impatient. "It's just for the day. We'll bring their plates back for you, okay? And I'll send you pictures." Send me pictures. Like I was a distant aunt. Like I was a neighbor. I pulled into my driveway, parked, and turned off the engine. The quiet hit me immediately, thick and familiar. "Linda," I said carefully, "why wasn't I invited?" Silence, not total silence, just enough to hear the truth taking its time. "It's complicated," she finally said. Complicated, a word people use when they don't want to admit something simple. I waited, letting her sit with it. Tom cleared his throat. "It's not personal, Carol. It's just, the house is already full, and your sister-in-law doesn't really—" My sister-in-law, Frank's sister, Diane, who had never liked me and had once said my pumpkin pie was fine the way people say a movie is fine when they hated it. Diane didn't really what? Want me there? Want the reminder that Frank had been loved by someone else? "Does Linda want me there?" I asked, because I needed to hear it. Another pause. Then Linda, softer now, as if speaking to a child. "Mom, please, don't make this a thing. You know I love you." Love should have sounded warmer than that. Love should have come with a chair at the table. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen and watched the light shift across the linoleum floor. My calendar hung beside the fridge, the squares filled with little notes in my handwriting. Doctor on Tuesday, pharmacy pickup, church on Sunday. The Thanksgiving square was blank. I'd left it blank on purpose, as if leaving space might invite something better to appear. Later, I went into the hall closet and found the spare key they'd never returned, the one that used to hang on a hook but had been missing for months. I remembered Linda asking for it just in case, and my own foolish relief at being needed. I checked the small wooden box where Frank kept extra keys. The hook was empty. That night, I sat at my dining table with a stack of papers spread out like a quiet confession. Utility bills, a receipt from the pharmacy, a contract from the roofing company that had fixed my shingles last spring, and, tucked between them, a printed copy of the bank transactions I'd pulled up earlier, the phone plan payment circled in pen. I wasn't looking for a fight, I was looking for clarity. There's a difference. When you've spent years being helpful, you start to confuse love with obligation, and you tell yourself it's noble. But as I traced that circled charge with the tip of my finger, I realized something I should have learned long ago. A person can be kind and still be taken for granted, and the kindest thing she can do, sometimes, is to stop. My phone buzzed again near midnight, a text from Linda. "So, can you do it? Please confirm. We need to plan." I didn't answer right away. I went to the window instead and looked out at my yard, the porch light casting a small circle on the frost-dusted grass. Maple Street was quiet, most houses already decorated, wreaths glowing faintly in living room windows. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed, a sound carrying through the cold. I thought about Frank's hands, how steady they were when he signed our mortgage papers, how he always said, "You don't have to earn your place in a family." I thought about how I'd spent years doing exactly that, earning and earning until I was exhausted. Then I went back to the table, picked up my pen, and wrote down a few notes on the back of an old envelope, names, dates, small facts I could verify, not as a threat, as a record, as the beginning of me taking my own life seriously again. Only after that did I pick up my phone and type, "I'll let you know tomorrow." And for the first time, I meant it. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 3 in the morning, when the house settles and every sound feels louder than it should, I lay staring at the ceiling and realized something simple and unsettling. I had been waiting for permission to matter. The thought sat heavy on my chest, not dramatic, just true. By morning, the decision wasn't sharp or angry. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when you stop arguing with yourself. I made oatmeal, fed the birds on the back porch, and then sat down at my desk with the small lamp Frank bought me years ago because he said the overhead light was too harsh. I turned on my old desktop computer, the one that hums before it wakes up, and logged into accounts I hadn't really examined in a long time. Bank statements, utility payments, insurance beneficiaries. Each page told the same story in a different font. I had made myself very easy to rely on. Around 10, I drove downtown to the credit union, where Frank and I had opened our first joint account. The building hadn't changed much. Same beige walls, same framed photos of smiling employees who probably no longer worked there. I took a number and waited, listening to printers whir and phones ring. When my turn came, a woman named Marcia greeted me. She was maybe in her 40s, with reading glasses hanging from a chain. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I handed her my ID and explained that I wanted a full review of my accounts and automatic payments. I said it calmly, like someone asking for a tire rotation. She nodded and pulled everything up on her screen, her fingers moving fast. As she read through the list, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're covering a family phone plan," she said, "and a streaming service under a different email." "That would be my daughter's," I replied. Marcia glanced at me, not unkindly. "Did you mean to keep these active?" The question landed gently but firmly. "At the time," I said, "yes." And now, I thought of Linda's text, of the empty Thanksgiving square on my calendar, of the word complicated. "Now," I said, "I need to understand what belongs to me." Marcia printed everything out, sliding the papers across the desk. There was something grounding about seeing it all on paper, black ink on white, undeniable. She explained my options, what could be changed immediately, what required notice, what needed signatures. Nothing dramatic, just procedures, rules, boundaries in the shape of forms. On my way out, I stopped by the library. It's a habit I picked up after Frank died, when the afternoons felt too long. I sat at a wooden table near the window and looked up information about elder financial boundaries. Not because I felt elderly, but because I was finally willing to accept that experience should come with some protection. I read about family dynamics, about how often help turns into expectation. I didn't feel foolish. I felt seen. My phone buzzed around noon. Linda again. "We really need an answer," she wrote. "Tom's sister can't watch them, and the sitter we use is out of town." I stared at the message, then at the notes I'd written the night before. Names, dates, small facts. I typed back slowly. "I won't be able to watch the kids on Thanksgiving." The response came fast. "What? Why?" I didn't answer right away. I packed up my things and drove home, the radio low, the sky pale and open above me. I parked, went inside, and sat at the kitchen table before replying. "Because I wasn't invited," I wrote, "and I don't want to feel invisible anymore." The phone rang almost immediately. Linda's voice was sharp at first, then hurt. "Mom, this feels like punishment." "It's not," I said. "It's honesty." Tom took the phone. "Carol, you're overreacting. It's one day." "For you," I replied. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "For me, it's been years." There was a stretch of silence longer than before. Then Linda again, quieter. "So what? You're just done helping?" "No," I said. "I'm done being assumed." After the call ended, My hands trembled a little, not from fear, from release. Have you ever felt that moment when standing up for yourself doesn't feel brave, just necessary? That afternoon, I found the spare key. It was in a drawer by the door, tucked under old mail. I held it in my palm, its edges worn smooth. I didn't march it over or make a scene. I put it on the counter, visible, waiting for the next time Linda came by. I was done pretending access was love. I also drafted an email to my lawyer, the one who had helped Frank and me with our wills years ago. I asked for a meeting to review documents, beneficiaries, powers of attorney. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't threaten. I just asked for clarity. When I hit send, I felt something settle inside me, like furniture finally placed where it belonged. That evening, I cooked for myself. Real food: chicken, roasted vegetables, a small loaf of bread from the bakery. I set the table, lit a candle, and ate slowly. No phone on the table. No waiting for messages. Just me, the quiet, and the sound of my own fork against the plate. As I washed the dishes, I thought about how easily love gets tangled with habit. How families can mean well and still cause harm. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used not out of cruelty but convenience? I dried my hands, turned off the light, and went to bed knowing something had shifted. Not everything. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, my life felt like it was back in my own hands. The days after that decision moved differently, like time had changed its pace just for me. Not faster, not slower, clearer. Linda didn't call. Tom didn't text. The silence felt pointed at first, then simply quiet. I kept expecting guilt to rise up and grab me by the collar, but it didn't. What I felt instead was a careful alertness, like walking on newly healed ground. On Monday morning, I put on my good coat and drove to my lawyer's office. The building sat between a dental clinic and a closed travel agency. The sign slightly faded, but familiar. Frank and I had first walked through those doors when we bought the house. Nervous and young, our hands brushing as we signed papers we barely understood back then. The receptionist recognized my name and smiled kindly, the practiced smile of someone who had seen many families unravel politely. I waited with a cup of lukewarm coffee and old magazines until Mr. Harris called me in. He was older now, too, his hair thinner, his voice softer, but his eyes were sharp. "What brings you in, Carol?" he asked, folding his hands on the desk. "I want to review everything," I said. "All of it." We went through documents one by one. The will. Frank and I had written together. The beneficiaries on my accounts. The medical power of attorney that still listed Linda as primary, simply because she was my daughter, and it seemed obvious at the time. Mr. Harris didn't push or judge. He explained options, consequences, timelines. I asked questions I should have asked years ago. When we reached the section about financial access, he paused. "Your daughter has authorization on this checking account," he said. "Limited, but active." I nodded. "I know. Do you still want that in place?" I thought of the missing spare key, of the automatic payments, of Thanksgiving. "Not anymore," I said. He made a note, precise and calm. Nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices, no accusations. Just a series of signatures that quietly shifted power back into my hands. When I left, the air outside felt colder, sharper, and strangely refreshing. That afternoon, Linda showed up unannounced. I heard her car before the knock, tires crunching on the gravel. I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door when I was ready. She stood there with her arms crossed, her coat half-zipped, irritation barely contained. "So, this is really happening," she said. I stepped aside to let her in, but she stayed on the porch. "If you mean me making choices for my own life, then yes," I replied. Her eyes flicked past me, into the house. "You could have talked to me first." I tried, I said. Many times. This is just the first time I acted. She sighed, a sound heavy with old habits. You're making things harder than they need to be. I looked at her, really looked at her. She had Frank's eyes, my stubborn chin. She wasn't cruel. She was rushed, distracted, used to me absorbing the edges of her life without complaint. I'm making them clearer, I said. She finally stepped inside. Her gaze landed on the spare key resting on the counter. She froze for a second, then picked it up. What's this? Mine, I said. I'll keep it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere, a car passed. You're changing, she said quietly. I know. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She set the key down and turned toward the door. I don't know how to do this if you won't help. I'll help, I said. When I'm asked, when I'm included, not when I'm assumed. She left without another word. That evening, I reviewed my calendar and blocked off Thanksgiving with a simple note. Day for myself. No bitterness, just fact. I ordered groceries online, something Frank would have teased me about, and scheduled a delivery for the morning. I also canceled the automatic phone payment. The confirmation email arrived seconds later, polite and final. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke early. The house smelled like coffee and bread warming in the oven. Outside, the street was quiet. Most people already gone to someone else's table. I cooked slowly, deliberately. I set the table for one and didn't apologize to myself for it. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A photo from Linda. The kids at the table, mid-laugh, no message attached. I looked at it, felt the familiar tug, and then set the phone face down. I ate my meal while it was hot. I took a walk after, leaves crunching under my boots, the sky wide and pale above me. That night, I wrote in my notebook, the one Frank gave me on our 20th anniversary. I didn't write about revenge. I wrote about balance, about how love doesn't disappear when boundaries appear, about how being useful is not the same as being valued. When I closed the notebook, I knew the hardest part wasn't over. Change rarely ends neatly. But I also knew this. I was no longer waiting to be invited into my own life. The week after Thanksgiving felt like standing in the doorway of a room I'd never been allowed to enter before. Everything looked familiar, but nothing was arranged the same way. Linda didn't call. The silence stretched long enough that it stopped feeling like a tactic and started feeling like a habit breaking. I kept busy, not to distract myself, but to stay anchored. On Tuesday, I went through the house with a legal pad and wrote down what actually belonged to me. Not emotionally, but practically. The deed to the house, still in my name alone. The insurance policies. The small savings account Frank and I had built slowly, painfully over decades. Seeing it all laid out reminded me that my life wasn't as fragile as I'd been led to believe. Midweek, I received an email from my lawyer's office confirming the changes we'd discussed. Updated beneficiaries, revised authorizations, everything orderly, documented, and legal. I printed the email and placed it in the filing cabinet, sliding it into the same folder where Frank's death certificate rested. Closure doesn't erase grief, but it does organize it. On Thursday afternoon, Tom called. I almost didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because I wanted to choose the moment, not react to it. I let it ring once more, then picked up. Carol, he said, skipping any greeting. Linda's upset. I know, I replied. She feels like you're pulling away from the family. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight slanting across the wood. I'm not pulling away, I said. I'm standing where I can be seen. He exhaled, frustrated. You're making this about you. It is about me, I said gently. It always has been. I just didn't say it out loud before. There was a pause. I could picture him rubbing his forehead, the way he did when he was annoyed but trying to sound reasonable. "So what now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to talk without assuming," I said. "Or we don't. That part isn't only up to me." After we hung up, my hands shook again, but less this time. Practice, I realized, makes honesty steadier. The following Saturday, I went to the community center for a bookkeeping workshop I'd seen advertised on the bulletin board. I almost talked myself out of it. New rooms can feel intimidating at my age, but I went anyway. The room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and coffee. Most people there were small business owners, a few retirees. No one knew my history. No one needed anything from me. I sat beside a woman named Ruth, widowed like me, who ran a small craft booth at the weekend market. We talked quietly as the instructor explained basic accounting software, receipts, and audit trails. The language was familiar. Frank and I had kept our own books for years. Still, I listened closely, aware that knowledge has a way of becoming armor. Afterward, Ruth asked if I wanted to get coffee. We sat at a cafe nearby, steam rising from our mugs, traffic humming outside. She told me about her adult son, who borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, about the line she finally had to draw. "I thought being firm meant being cold," she said. "Turns out it just meant being clear." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. When I got home, I found an envelope in my mailbox, addressed in Linda's handwriting. Inside was a short note. "I don't know how to do this differently," it read, "but I don't want to lose you." I sat on the porch steps for a long time holding that paper. The wind lifted it slightly, as if testing how tightly I would hold on. I wanted to rush over, smooth everything out, make it easier for her. The old reflex tugged hard. Instead, I folded the note and placed it in my pocket. Love didn't require me to erase myself. It required me to show up whole. That night, I wrote back. Not a long letter, just a few lines. "I'm here. I want a relationship, not a role. We can learn together." I didn't know how she would respond. I only knew that whatever came next would be built on truth, not convenience. As I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I felt tired in a clean way, the kind that comes from effort, not endurance. The house was quiet, steady around me. For the first time in years, that quiet felt like support, not absence. The shift came not with an argument, but with paperwork. A thick envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded from Linda's address to mine. Inside were school forms for Emily and Josh, emergency contacts, authorized pickups, medical consent pages. My name was printed neatly in 3 different places, already filled in, unchecked boxes waiting for my signature. There was a yellow sticky note on top, Linda's handwriting unmistakable. "Can you sign these and bring them by? Deadline Friday." No greeting, no acknowledgement of the letter I'd written. Just assumption, dressed up as urgency. I sat at the kitchen table and spread the papers out. The language was precise, clinical. Responsibility without authority, liability without voice. I noticed one line in particular, the one that allowed the school to release children into my care at any time, without notice. Another line allowed me to consent to medical treatment if neither parent could be reached. I imagined a phone call in the middle of the day. A nurse's calm voice, a decision made in a hallway somewhere while I waited alone. All the weight, none of the respect. I didn't sign. Instead, I drove to the elementary school that afternoon. The office smelled like disinfectant and crayons. Children's artwork lined the walls, turkeys made of handprints, thankful lists written in uneven pencil. I gave my name at the front desk and asked to speak with the administrator. A woman named Mrs. Keller met me in a small office. She was professional, kind, the sort of person who listened with her whole face. "I'm listed as an emergency contact," I explained, placing the forms on her desk. But I need to clarify my role. She scanned the pages, nodding slowly. You're authorized for quite a bit here, she said. Yes, I replied, without being consulted. Mrs. Keller leaned back slightly. That's not uncommon with grandparents. I understand, I said. But I want it documented that I'm available only with prior agreement. I won't be an automatic solution. She studied me for a moment, then smiled softly. That's completely reasonable. She made notes, adjusted the file, and printed an updated authorization page. Everything was done properly, transparently. No drama, just clarity. When I left the school, my phone buzzed. Linda. Why did the school call me? She asked, irritation barely contained. Because I changed my status, I said. You went behind my back. No, I replied. I stepped out of a role you assigned without asking. There was a long pause, then quieter. I didn't think it was a big deal. That's the problem, I said gently. It should have been. That night, I sat alone and wondered how many times I'd swallowed that same sentence over the years. How many small permissions I'd granted that slowly rewrote my place in the family. Have you ever looked back and realized the moment you became expected instead of appreciated? A few days later, Linda came over. She looked tired, older somehow. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once helped her with homework, where Frank had carved the turkey every year. I don't know how to ask for help without feeling like I'm failing, she said finally. I reached across the table but didn't take her hand. And I don't know how to help without disappearing, I replied. We sat with that truth between us. It didn't solve everything, but it didn't need to. After she left, I updated my files again. School boundaries documented, financial access reviewed, keys accounted for. It wasn't revenge. It was architecture. I was rebuilding the structure of my life so it could hold me, not just everyone else. That evening, I took a walk as the sun dipped low, the air crisp, the neighborhood quiet. Lights flickered on in windows. Somewhere, a family was setting a table. I felt no bitterness, only resolve, because for the first time, the rules were written where I could see them. And this time, I was included in the decisions. By December, the air had turned sharp and honest. Cold has a way of stripping things down to what's real, and I felt the same thing happening inside me. Linda and I spoke occasionally now, short conversations, careful but not hostile. We were learning new steps without calling it that. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the utility company. Not a bill, but a notice. My name was listed as a secondary contact on an account I didn't recognize. The address wasn't mine. It was Linda's. I sat down immediately. I called the number on the letter and waded through the familiar maze of options until a representative came on the line. After verifying my identity, she explained that my name and phone number were still attached to Linda's electric account, added years ago when they'd moved and needed a deposit waived. Am I financially responsible? I asked. No, ma'am, she said, but you are authorized to receive notices and make changes. Make changes. I thanked her and hung up, then stared at the wall for a long moment. It wasn't malicious. It was habitual. I had been woven into their infrastructure so completely that no one thought to remove me. I drove over to Linda's house that evening. The porch light flickered as I knocked. Tom answered, surprise flashing across his face. We need to talk, I said. Linda joined us in the living room, kids upstairs, the television murmuring softly. I laid the letter on the coffee table between us. I'm still listed on your utilities, I said. I need to be removed from anything that connects my name to your household. Linda frowned. I didn't even remember that. I know, I said. That's why it matters. Tom shifted uncomfortably. It was just for the deposit. And now it's permanent, I replied. Unless someone changes it. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the heater. Finally, Linda nodded. Okay, we'll fix it. I watched as she opened her laptop and logged into the account. She handed me the screen so I could see my name being removed, line by line. It felt strange to witness my own erasure and relief at the same time. Before I left, Linda hesitated. You're different lately, she said. Stronger? I smiled softly. I was always strong. I just stopped spending it all at once. On the drive home, snow began to fall, light and steady. The streetlights caught each flake, turning the world quiet and white. I felt calm, grounded. A few days later, I met Ruth for coffee again. We talked about small things, recipes, winter boots, the way the baby complains more in the cold. Then she told me she'd started saying no to her son when the answer needed to be no. It feels like grief, she admitted, even when it's right. I understood that deeply. Growth often does. That night, I organized my files one last time. Every account, every authorization, every connection either clearly defined or removed. When I closed the cabinet, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. I stood by the window and watched the snow settle on Maple Street. Houses glowed softly, each one holding its own complicated story. Mine finally felt like it belonged to me again. The letter arrived in early January, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a handwritten holiday card from Ruth. The envelope was official, heavier than it needed to be. My name printed in the kind of font institutions use when they want to be taken seriously. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the hall table and took off my coat, my scarf, my boots. I made tea first. By the time I sat down, the steam rising steady and calm, I already knew this was another layer peeling back. It was from the county clerk's office. The language was polite and dense, full of references and dates. It explained that a small business license renewal, connected to Tom's side consulting work, had been flagged because my address and phone number were still listed as secondary contact information. The notice wasn't an accusation. It was a request for clarification. Still, my chest tightened as I read it again, slower this time. I hadn't known about the business at all. I picked up the phone and called the number listed. After a few transfers, I reached a clerk named Mr. Alvarez. His voice was calm, practiced, the voice of someone who spent his days untangling other people's administrative knots. I just want to be clear, I said. I'm not involved in this business in any way. According to our records, you're not listed as an owner, he replied, but your contact information appears on earlier filings. How long ago? I asked. 5 years, he said. It was likely used as a stable address. A stable address. My home. My life. I'd like that corrected, I said. Of course, he replied. We'll need a written statement and a copy of your ID. We can remove you from all associated records. There it was again, the pattern, my steadiness quietly borrowed, my name used as reassurance. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still. For a moment, anger flickered. Not hot, not explosive, just a brief flare of recognition. I had been used not because I was weak, but because I was reliable, because I never made noise. I printed the form, filled it out carefully, attached my ID, and mailed it certified. The receipt slid out of the machine at the post office with a soft mechanical whine, proof that I had spoken in a language institutions understood. That afternoon, Linda called. Tom got a notice from the county, she said, tense, about you being removed from the business paperwork. Yes, I replied. You didn't even tell us you were doing that. I didn't know I was on it, I said, until they contacted me. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. He said it was just old paperwork. I believe that, I said. But it's still my name. You could have talked to us first. I closed my eyes briefly. Linda, I've spent years being talked around. This time, I responded. Her voice softened, then hardened again. This feels like you don't trust us. I chose my words carefully. It feels like I'm finally trusting myself. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. Everything's changing. Yes, I said. It is. After the call, I sat at the window and watched the bare branches sway against a pale winter sky. Change has a sound if you listen closely. It's not loud. It's the sound of old structures settling into something new. A week later, I received confirmation from the clerk's office. My name had been removed from all records. Clean. Final. I placed the letter in my file cabinet and felt a surprising lightness, as if some invisible thread had finally been cut. Around that time, the community center posted a notice looking for volunteers to help with financial literacy sessions for seniors. Budgeting, understanding contracts, recognizing predatory practices. I read it twice, then a third time. I applied. The orientation was held in a small conference room with folding chairs and a faint smell of coffee. There were 6 of us, all with different backgrounds. A retired accountant, a former bank teller, a woman who'd run her own catering business for decades, and me. When it was my turn to introduce myself, I said, I've spent most of my life managing a household, raising children, and keeping things afloat quietly. I know how easy it is to let other people's needs blur your own boundaries. The coordinator nodded. That experience matters. The first session I helped with was modest, 10 people, a projector that flickered slightly. We talked about reading bank statements, understanding automatic payments, asking questions without shame. I watched faces change as information settled in. Relief, embarrassment, gratitude. Afterward, an older man approached me. I thought I was the only one who didn't understand where my money was going, he said. You're not, I replied. You were just never taught to look. Driving home that evening, I felt something new growing alongside my resolve. Purpose. Not the kind that comes from being needed, but the kind that comes from choosing where you stand. At home, I cooked soup and froze half of it, labeling the containers neatly. I rearranged the living room slightly, moving Frank's chair closer to the window, not as a shrine, but as a reminder of comfort. I called Ruth and told her about the volunteer work. She laughed softly. Look at you, she said, turning experience into wisdom. Or finally admitting they're the same thing, I replied. Linda came by one Saturday afternoon with the kids. No agenda, no forms, just a visit. Emily showed me a school project. Josh asked if I still had the old board games in the closet. We sat at the table and played quietly. Linda watched for a while, then helped me clear dishes. There was an ease there, tentative, but real. I didn't realize how much you were carrying, she said suddenly. I didn't rush to reassure her. I didn't either, I said. Before she left, she hesitated at the door. I'm trying, she said. I can see that, I replied, and I meant it. That night, I wrote in my notebook again, about how power doesn't always announce itself, about how reclaiming your name can feel like reclaiming your breath, about how the most meaningful changes often happen without witnesses. I closed the notebook and turned off the light, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. Outside, Maple Street was quiet, winter holding everything still for a moment. Inside, I felt steady. Not finished, but firmly, unmistakably, my own. The first warm day of March arrived without asking permission. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window early, catching dust in the air and turning it into something almost gentle. I stood there longer than usual, hand resting on the counter, letting the warmth touch my skin. Winter had been heavy this year, not just in weather, but in work. Quiet, necessary work that doesn't show on calendars. Linda called later that morning. Not rushed, not sharp. "Mom," she said, and waited, as if reminding herself to slow down. "Do you have time to come by this afternoon?" I did. I always had time now because my time finally belonged to me. Their house looked the same when I pulled up. Toys scattered near the driveway, a recycling bin tipped slightly to one side. Familiar, but something in the air felt different. When Linda opened the door, she didn't stand aside expecting me to step in automatically. She stepped back and invited me in with a small gesture, like a host who remembered manners. Tom was at the dining table with papers spread out. Not bills, documents, printed emails, forms, a laptop open but untouched. "We need to talk," he said, standing up. His voice wasn't defensive. It was careful. I took off my coat and sat down, folding it neatly over the chair. I didn't brace myself. That alone felt like progress. Tom slid a folder toward me. "We've been going through everything," he said. "Accounts, authorizations, contacts, all the places your name showed up without us really thinking about it." Linda sat beside him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't realize how much we leaned on you," she said. "Not just emotionally, structurally." Structurally. That word again. The invisible beams. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were copies of updated utility accounts, school forms with my name clearly marked as limited contact, a letter from their bank confirming removal of my information. Everything neat, everything documented. Tom cleared his throat. "I also spoke with the county clerk," he said, "about the business filings. That was on me. I used your address years ago because it was stable, and I didn't think it mattered. I was wrong." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something new there. Not guilt, accountability. "Thank you," I said. Linda swallowed. "I think I got used to you being constant, like the ground. I didn't realize how much weight that put on you." I closed the folder. "The ground cracks if you never check it," I said gently. We sat there for a while, the house quiet around us. No children's voices, no television, just 3 adults learning how to exist without old shortcuts. "I don't want us to lose you," Linda said. "You won't," I replied. "But you don't get to keep me the old way." She nodded, eyes shining but steady. "I know." When I left that afternoon, I felt something close that had been open for years, not sealed shut, just respected. In the weeks that followed, life didn't suddenly become perfect. It became honest. I continued volunteering at the community center twice a week. Word spread quietly. More people came. Some brought folders thick with unopened mail. Others brought only questions. I learned how to listen without fixing, how to explain without taking over. I watched people straighten in their chairs when they realized confusion wasn't failure. It was simply a lack of information. One woman stayed after a session, clutching her purse tightly. "My daughter handles all my money," she said softly. "I don't even know how much I have." I didn't tell her what to do. I told her what she was allowed to ask. The difference mattered. At home, I made changes that had nothing to do with anyone else. I replaced the old couch cushions. I repainted the spare bedroom a soft, warm color instead of the pale blue Linda had chosen years ago, because it was neutral. I donated clothes I'd kept because someone else liked them. I took a weekend trip by myself to a small coastal town 2 hours away. Nothing fancy. A clean motel room, a view of the water. I walked slowly, ate clam chowder from a paper cup, watched the tide move in. and out without explanation. I didn't check my phone much. The world didn't end. One evening, back home, I went through old photo albums, not to mourn, to remember accurately. Frank at 40, laughing hard. Linda at 7, missing 2 front teeth. Me, younger than I remembered, eyes clearer than I'd given myself credit for. I realized how often women my age shrink their own stories, as if humility requires disappearance. Spring settled into Maple Street gently. Gardens stirred. Neighbors waved longer. I joined a small walking group that met twice a week. No one needed me there. That was the gift. Linda and I found a new rhythm. Sometimes we met for lunch. Sometimes weeks passed. When she asked for help, she asked clearly. When I said no, it didn't collapse the relationship. That might have been the most surprising part. One afternoon, she brought Emily and Josh over with a box between them. "We want to make something clear," she said. Inside the box was a framed photo from years ago, one of the last Thanksgivings Frank had been alive. All of us at the table, crowded, loud, imperfect. "We don't want you as backup," Linda said. "We want you as family." I touched the frame lightly. "Then make space," I said. "Every time." She nodded, this time without hesitation. That night I sat alone in my living room, the lamp casting a soft circle of light. I thought about how revenge is often imagined as confrontation, as victory over someone else. But what I had done didn't feel like that. It felt like withdrawal from a system that benefited from my silence. The real reckoning hadn't happened in courtrooms or offices. It had happened in kitchens, at desks, over paperwork and pauses, in moments where I chose clarity over comfort. I wasn't invisible anymore, not because others suddenly saw me, but because I stopped making myself disappear. When I turned off the light and went upstairs, my steps were slow but steady. The house held me the way it always had. Only now, I was fully inside my own life, and there was room to breathe. The call came in late April, on a quiet afternoon when the windows were open, and the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and spring air. It was the police department's non-emergency number. For a split second, my heart tightened the way it still does when an unfamiliar authority reaches out. But the voice on the other end was calm, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Walker," the officer said, "we're just following up on a report filed regarding a vehicle registration discrepancy. Your name came up as a previous emergency contact. We wanted to confirm you're no longer associated." I smiled, just a little. "That's correct," I said. "I'm not." He thanked me, noted it in the system, and wished me a pleasant day. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but when I hung up, I stood very still in the middle of my living room. Not because I was shaken, because I wasn't. Once, a call like that would have sent me spiraling into explanations, apologies, worry about how others might be affected. Now it was simply information exchanged, a record updated, a boundary respected. That was how I knew the story had truly ended. Life didn't suddenly turn poetic or easy after that. It became smaller in a good way, more intentional. I woke up when my body was ready. I took walks without counting steps. I learned which afternoons were best for errands, and which were meant for sitting with a book and letting the light move across the room. At the community center, the financial literacy sessions became a regular part of my week. I watched people arrive tense and leave lighter, clutching folders they now understood. Sometimes they asked how I learned all this. I never gave a dramatic answer. "I paid attention when I had to," I said, and I stopped ignoring myself. Linda and I found something steadier than we'd ever had before. Not closeness built on obligation, but connection built on choice. She invited me to dinner one evening in May, just the four of us. No favors attached, no unspoken expectations. At the table, Josh spilled his drink, and Linda reached for paper towels without panic. Emily told a long, winding story about school that made no sense and didn't need to. Tom carved the chicken and asked if I wanted more before assuming. I looked around and realized something important. This was what respect looked like in practice. Quiet, ordinary, real. Later that night, as I drove home with the windows down, I passed the old elementary school. The lights were still on in one wing, a custodian moving from room to room. Life continuing in small, unseen ways. I felt grateful, not in a dramatic, thankful for everything sense, but in a grounded way. Grateful that I had lived long enough to correct my own course. At 67, people expect you to be finished. Finished changing. Finished learning. Finished standing up. They think wisdom means acceptance of whatever is handed to you. They're wrong. Wisdom, I've learned, is knowing when acceptance turns into erasure. I spent years believing love meant availability, that being good meant being useful, that silence was a form of peace. But peace that costs you your voice isn't peace at all, it's just quiet harm. My revenge, if you can even call it that, was never about punishing anyone. It was about withdrawing my name from places it had been borrowed without care. It was about choosing paperwork over arguments, clarity over guilt, law over drama. It was about understanding that boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal whether there was anything solid underneath to begin with. Now my days are filled with small, honest things. Coffee with Ruth, long letters to an old friend, music playing while I cook, just for myself. I still help. I still love. But I do it from a place of choice, not reflex. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit by the window and think about how close I came to spending the rest of my life as a background solution. A name on forms, a spare key, a quiet yes. If you're listening to this and feeling that familiar tightness in your chest, that sense that you're needed but not seen, let me ask you something gently, honestly. Have you mistaken endurance for love? Because it's never too late to step back into your own life. Not loudly, not angrily, just firmly with both feet on the ground. Thank you for sitting with me through this story, for listening to a woman who learned a little late but not too late. If this resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you showed your support with a like and subscribe to hear more stories like mine. And I truly want to know, if you were in my place, what would you have done?